I'm Scott Biden. I'm the chapter president for ICSA, Washington, D.C. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to start. So I'm going to rush through this. So I just want to talk about a couple of things first. The first thing, which is probably the most important thing at this time of the year, is our elections. We have yearly elections, and it's for the board of directors for really for the 2020 year. So every year we go through this, and I just want to talk about the process so everybody understands. To be considered part of the board of directors, for number one, the most important requirement is to be a chapter member. If you're a chapter member, you're eligible to be on the board of directors. And we've got positions are president, executive vice president, treasurer, VP of Communications, VP of Programs, VP of Education, VP of Membership, and VP of Strategic Relations. So we're always looking for new members to step up. Again, this is strictly a volunteer organization. We like to give back, and what we mean by giving back is bringing on speakers every month to come and talk about different topics, topics related to cybersecurity, information security, the different domains of the CISSP. So we like to have all different kinds of topics and presentations. And again, unfortunately or fortunately, we don't pay our speakers. It's all volunteer, just like the organization.
I'm not worth it. You get what you pay for.
Thanks. Looking forward to it. The way the organization works is by sponsorship and by a small amount for, if you're a member, that goes back to the chapter, back to this chapter. And again, we get to supply some food for dinner. The good thing is we actually don't pay for the space, but our space, Alex Pryor, who's sitting over here, he actually hosts us here in this great space. So we really appreciate that, and always thank Alex for that. Because it's his time, he's off work, he's off the clock. Again, he's volunteering his time and effort to provide the space, provide the communications, the technology, which is fantastic. This is an awesome space. I know Alex just requested that he's got to leave early tonight, so we're trying to wrap it up in a smaller amount of time than we normally do. And I've already talked to our speaker, so it's doable. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time up here talking about different things, but I just wanted to go over our schedule for our elections. So our elections actually opened up on November 10th for nominations. Nominations will close November 24th. So if you are a member, if you do want to run for the board position, you have until the 24th to nominate yourself or somebody else that's a member. Those nominations are collected. And then on the 25th, those candidates are announced. And then the ballots are collected starting on the 25th. And we're going to probably close the elections on December 10th. What happens in November is November and December are a little different months for us. Again, elections are going on. And December is the only month that we actually don't have our own chapter meeting. We partner with SANS, which is a great deal. SANS is a big supporter of ISSA. We're a big supporter of SANS. SANS comes to DC every December. Their dates change, so we have to be adjusted. We have to be flexible for when they come and do their SANS presentations in DC. So we don't have an exact date yet for December, but they won't be here. But it will be at the hotel that SANS usually books. And sometimes we change up the hotel, so all of our information is on our website. All the information is put out through emails. So you'll look forward to that. You'll see that sometime in December. So again, I can't harp or say strongly enough that please, we love volunteers. So to be on the board, or if you want to help the chapter out, please come speak to me. I'd be happy to talk to you more in detail about what the position is required and what it's all about. Are there any questions? Because I see a lot of new faces here about ISSA. I know I didn't talk about it, but if you have specific questions that I can help answer. All right, so if there's no specific questions, let me just tell you my 1 minute spiel about ISSA. It's an international association. Once a year they have an international conference in different places. I think this past one was in Dallas. They've been all the chapters around the world to that location. Great speakers. It's about a 2-day conference, and the day prior it's usually geared towards like a CISO conference specifically. And this chapter is, we consider it's a relatively small chapter compared to some other chapters. Again, that's a good thing. That's the way we look at it, because you're up front and close to the speaker. If you've got questions, the speaker has the time usually to answer all those questions, rather than in a large conference type setting where you might not get all your questions answered, you might not feel as close to the presenter as you do in a small space. So, I know there's some other other board of director members here. Anybody else have any quick comments that you'd like to present?
Yeah, I'm David. I'm the member director. Please join the members. Please become a member. We rely on the member income to help keep this going. And even though we have a lot of, we all volunteer our time and the space is volunteer, we do have expenses. And there are a lot of benefits to being a member as well. There are videos online that will give you additional continuing education credits. You get credits for coming here. And there's an excellent magazine that comes out monthly, comes out quarterly in printed form, but comes out monthly in electronic form. And a ton of resources and continuing education groups online that you can get more information about every possible area of cybersecurity on the ISSA website. And you have to be a member to get access to all of those membership benefits. There are a lot of other benefits, but I'm going to keep it short tonight. So please consider becoming a member. Thank you.
I kind of skipped over probably one of the most important things, and if you're here for CPEs, which a lot of people have certifications and we need to keep those up. I don't know if you saw the QR code up on the screen prior to this screen up here. Did everybody that wants your CPEs registered tonight for the CPE? You still need to do it? Alex, can you just swap that for
Just switch it for a second.
minute?
Yeah.
So if you don't know how to do it, usually just by the QR code, it'll take you right to the website. There's 4 pieces of information: your date, your name, are you a member, or not, your email address. That's it. That's all we ask for, and then that gets you onto the email address as well. QR code on the right, scan it, work your way to the website. And go to the website. We'll probably have this up for 1 minute. We'll probably have it up at the end as well if you don't get to it. For people that have not been here before, the second probably most important thing is bathrooms are through these exit doors or out and around, back out here. Trash can in the back. Please help yourself to food. Even while the speaker is presenting, you want to get rid of it. You don't want to take it home. Any last questions before our speaker comes on? All right. I think we're good with the QR code, Alex. Thank you. All right, it's my pleasure to host our speaker for tonight. The topic is Better Identity Coalition. Our speaker is Jeremy Grant. Jeremy is going to introduce himself, and I look forward to your presentation. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks. It's not showing. Well, it does look lovely. Hang on, let me see if I do it again. That's a lot less exciting than the last picture. But so, hi everybody, I'm Jeremy Grant. This will be a discussion that I think is a mix of more of a policy focus probably than, sort of a hardcore security topic, which I know you guys, might dive into other times. My background, I've been in DC since the mid-90s, doing a whole bunch of different things at the intersection of cybersecurity and identity. I started my career as a Senate staffer in the 90s and ended up working for Senator Chuck Robb from Virginia, who was basically the godfather of smart cards and PKI in government. So if you have a CAC or a PIV card or have worked with those, that's my fault. And ended up, after he lost his election, going in the tech side, working for an integrator for several years, building a lot of early smart card, PKI, biometric, federated identity systems. Spent a few years as a market analyst, helping investors understand the space. And then had the opportunity to go back into government. I was recruited by the Obama administration in late 2010 when they were getting ready to launch the NSTIC program, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. And so in that role, I stood at the National Program Office that ran that up at NIST. Spent 4.5 years at NIST building out the Trusted Identities Group, did research, standards, pilots work, and then went back into the private sector in 2015. Was actually just across the street from here for a couple of years at the Chertoff Group, and now I work at Venable, which is a law firm about 7 blocks that way, where I'm not a lawyer, but we've got the largest privacy and cybersecurity legal practice in the country, and a few people like me who aren't attorneys who sort of tuck in alongside them, who understand things that attorneys don't necessarily understand, but often get asked. That's the easiest way I could describe it. So the Better Identity Coalition, I'll start up front by saying this was a group that was formed almost 2 years ago. I never intended to try and start a trade organization around identity, though it's a really Washington thing to do, have a trade organization. But we were formed really after the Equifax breach, when a whole bunch of questions started getting asked by policymakers and folks in industry about what are the implications of what just happened here on the way we do digital identity, and what is it we need to do to fix it. So the organization formally launched in February 2018, although a lot of the discussions to start it really started right around this time 2 years ago. And the group's focused on developing and advancing consensus-driven cross-sector policy solutions that promote the development and adoption of better solutions for identity and authentication. We're an initiative of a nonprofit called the Center for Cybersecurity Policy and Law. And our mission really is as governments contemplating new policies around how to fix things in identity, how to make things, not just more secure, but also easier to use and better for privacy. We're bringing companies together from different sectors to help develop policy ideas that can improve security and privacy and convenience for all Americans. So I mentioned, this thing kind of started by accident. A lot of proposals popped out after the Equifax breach. So there was a hearing just about 2 years ago where both the former CEO of Equifax said we need to replace the social security number with something entirely new. Rob Joyce, when he was the president cybersecurity coordinator, said the same thing the same day. SSNs are done, we need to replace them. My take was, replace what? It's both an identifier and an authenticator, and those are two really different things. And we'll get into why those are, you need to understand those things when you're having this discussion. Patrick McHenry, who was a pretty high-ranking Republican on the House side, introduced legislation would have banned the credit bureaus from using the social security number for any identification purpose within 2 years, which on one hand sounded really great after one of the bureaus had disclosed 144 million SSNs. The flip side is if you did that, the economy would crater in about 36 hours because nobody could get credit anymore. That's just the way our system works. So after getting calls, that generated a number of calls from the Hill, people asking me, hey, based on your experience, what do we do here? I had friends who were CIOs and CISOs in agencies who were, in some cases, leveraging Equifax for knowledge-based authentication. That's the way you basically figure out who's who when a citizen knocks on the door and tries to get a service, is you ask them 5 questions and hope it's not somebody who already has the answers. And a lot of companies were asking, what's going to go on? These are bad ideas. Are there any good ones? And we basically got together and said, would there be value in bringing together a group of companies from different sectors that might actually come up with some better ideas? Because the thought was that the Hill and the administration seemed to really want to do something, but they just seemed stuck. They really weren't quite sure where to go, and there was concern that if they kept throwing random ideas out there, some might stick and could actually potentially make things worse. So our members today, we're up to 24 members now. In fact, I've got an updated Ping Identity just joined this week. But it's an interesting mix. It's most of the big banks, along with companies like on the payment side, like Visa and MasterCard and Discover. Microsoft on the tech side, Aetna helped launch us on the healthcare side. Quicken Loans, who's I think doing more mortgages than anybody else in the country. This is a little different than other groups that we've seen before in identity and security, in that it's not being driven by the vendors who make the solutions. It's being driven by the companies who are the customers of them. And I think part of the reason our message has resonated in the short time we've been around is that's a bit of a different message when the big customers are coming in and saying these things are important to improve identity as opposed to just the vendors. Now, we do have a bunch of companies as well on the vendor side, but we try to really maintain the balance and make sure that it's not a vendor-driven forum. Our strength is really our, I think the diversity of big companies that are actually customers. You also see all the big credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion are members. We didn't let them in at first. The banks were really mad. We thought it would not be credible as we were writing our policy blueprint if they were at the table. After we published it last summer, they all came to us and said, you might be surprised to hear this, but we actually agree with your recommendations. We'd like to be part of this. And after a lively debate among the founding members, we decided we were better having them at the table since they're still an important part of the ecosystem than not. And so that's sort of the group today. It's been an interesting group of companies to work with. The challenge, so this cartoon, I think a lot of you guys have seen it working in this space. This cartoon's now 26 years old. It was published in July of 1993, which means the dogs in this cartoon are dead, because dog years, and their kids are dead, and probably even the dog's grandkids, granddogs, whatever, are a lot of dead dogs. Sorry for the imagery. But the problem is still with us today. And in fact, I'd argue that it's getting worse, because in 1993, this was sort of good for some yucks about what it was like going online for the first time. Well, now it's being actively weaponized against us. It's rare that a breach happens these days and identity doesn't provide the attack vector. We're seeing nation states actually look to exploit identity to try and interfere in our democracy. I'd say dogs in the internet are a bigger problem than ever. And there's a whole bunch of issues that really come with this identity issue. It's, security, how do we maintain privacy with identity, deliver great customer experiences, achieve compliance, lower transaction costs. A lot of this all sort of comes down to how do you build systems that come with trust. And trust has been really hard to get right online. But identity, when you can do it right, and that's been really hard to do for at least the last 26 years, can help to enable trust. Identity can become the great enabler that's helping to provide a foundation for digital transactions and online experiences that are more secure, that are easier to use, and that are better to protect privacy than a lot of the legacy solutions that we have today. So the challenge, as my old office at NIST wrote in the introduction to Special Club 800-63, is that this is hard to get right. It presents a technical challenge because the process often involves proofing individuals over an open network, and it always involves the authentication of individual subjects over an open network. And they went on to say that the processes and technologies that we use to both establish and use digital identity offer multiple opportunities for impersonation and other attacks. This is why we're still stuck here after all these years. It's a really hard problem to solve. So our approach to date has been, trying to come up with some things that worked for a little bit. So, you ever had to pick a name for your pet? Well, now your kids really got to think about that because it might have some implications downstream. And, this whole idea of, hey, we'll have security questions that only you know is proven to be really practical, particularly if, you might change your mind from, week to week about one of the answers. I know United, for my second factor, United Airlines asked, what's your favorite animal? And I don't know, is it an elephant? Is it an orca? Is it a cheetah? I mean, it depends, what zoo I was at recently and what, emotions I felt after visiting. But, if you get the answer wrong, well, you get thrown into the pit of despair. And it's especially then a problem when our adversaries already know the answer. And this really gets to some of the issues around using SSN as an authenticator. This hasn't worked well. You guys have all dealt with this password criteria over the years. Nobody can manage these things that we're trying to impose on people for one password, let alone 20, 30, 50, 150. There really isn't any such thing as a secure password in 2019, and that most of the attacks we see, nobody's brute forcing passwords. That's pretty rare. They're going to spearfish. So you can have a 64-character password that's really complex, and if you're successfully spearphished, well, you can just type that in, and somebody's off and running with your account. And also, pretty importantly, this kind of thing makes your employees and customers hate you. I'd argue, we actually debated at NIST, should we declare passwords of just their existence a vulnerability? In that it's the worst combination of security and user experience. And if you have poor user experience and you've got a vulnerability, we never went that far, but it was good for discussion over whiskey. But this is sort of where we're at these days. The cost of outdated identity solutions is really notable. We haven't updated this since last year's report, but 2017, nearly 17 million victims of identity fraud, nearly 17 billion stolen, a 45% increase in data breaches year over year, a 389% increase in the number of records that are stolen. And you guys have seen this. The number goes on and on. It's not particularly good. And we put these numbers together in part as we're trying to craft an appeal to policymakers to make the point that this isn't just a bunch of cybersecurity weenies complaining here. There's actually some real dollars here that are at stake, and millions of people being impacted. It's really has an impact on the economy. And in particular, we've seen an increase in synthetic identity fraud, $6 billion by most estimates lost each year, where somebody will basically create a digital Frankenstein using some elements of a real identity and some of a fake name. So the most common way that goes forward is you'll take, so I've got 2 kids, so take my 8-year-old's SSN. Somebody steals it, puts it through to apply for a credit card with a fake name, and of course the first time the credit bureau see it, they've never seen this name in SSN, so they deny it. But what they do is make a note that, oh, Joe Schmo with my son's SSN applied for credit, and then 3 months later that fraudster will then basically take that and put them on as an authorized bill or on another account that's open. Now that digital Frankenstein's got a credit history, and another few months go by, they pay their bills, they can open up a separate account in that name and another, and then basically you build up a lot of credit and then poof, disappear and abscond with all the money, and then the kid turns 18 and goes to get the first credit card and realizes that there's a dozen accounts in their name, and at least the number associated with their name is totally wrecked. And this all happens because the credit bureaus, at least to date, have had no way to actually validate the first time they see a name in SSN. They don't know if it's a real one. Some things are happening to address this. So why has this been so hard to solve? Well, one of the things we tried to do with the work that we've done in the coalition has been to change the debate, because one of the big challenges that I've been frustrated with over the years is every time an identity issue comes up, somebody says, well, if we only did a national ID, have you seen what the Estonians have done? And then they throw it on the table, and it's political hot potato, and everybody sort of rushes off to the corners and throws stuff at it. And everybody forgets to talk about the underlying problem, which is not that you need a national ID card, but that we don't have any digital way to basically, leverage the cards we already have today. So in the paper we talk about the concept of the identity gap. We already have a number of nationally recognized authoritative identity systems in this country, but they're all trapped in the paper world. And commerce is increasingly digital. We've yet to figure out a way to take, look, we can walk down to, Cafe Mozart afterwards and show our driver's license to show that we can get a pint or something bigger, half liter. I gotta run home early to see my kids, not happening tonight. But trying to do that online, look, they can look at my driver's license in person, but it just doesn't translate over. And so the point we've made is we already have a number of nationally recognized authoritative identity systems. We don't need a new card. In fact, we don't need a card at all. What we just need are the systems that we have today to also be used in a way that works online. So, if you've ever had knowledge-based authentication, if you're trying to, say, apply for a credit card, this was an attempt to get around the identity gap that we have out there. And, which of the following 4 banks gave you a loan in 2013? Which of the following 5 street addresses have you been in, lived at in the last, 15 years? Here's 4 phone numbers. Which one have you ever, had? The attackers have caught up with this. It's not particularly good, but the reason we went to this is we didn't have anything from the government that we could actually rely on. And industry needed something to do stuff online. You want to apply for a credit card online, you want to be able to access some government services online. Knowledge-based authentication was basically the best thing we had. And it worked for a while, but today the attackers have caught up. And this happened 2 years before Equifax. I got a lot of questions after the Equifax breach, from a couple of people in agencies, do we need to tear out KBA? And the answer was yeah, but you needed to do that 2 years ago when the IRS got breached using KBA, and 700,000 Americans had their tax transcripts stolen because it was being implemented in kind of a sloppy way. And as you can see the bottom of the second article, hackers already had the keys. The whole idea of these, so-called secret questions that you'd be asked was the out-of-wallet questions. I mean, if I found your wallet on the street, I couldn't go through and say, know who had your mortgage or what the average payment was. But what we've seen with this epidemic of mega breaches over the last 10 years or so is adversaries are basically stealing and aggregating and analyzing a lot of this. In part, Greg Walden had a hearing on this about 2 years ago, chairman of at the time of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And he said, all these breaches, we have one, we haul the people in here, and we yell at them, and then nothing happens, and then it happens 6 months later, and we repeat the cycle again. He says, we've got to stop looking at these breaches in isolation. Because what you're seeing is, well, any one breach creates some serious issues. What we're now seeing is the potential for malicious actors to combine multiple stolen data sets into one, which then enables them to obtain more complete packages of identity information. And this is some of what we're seeing. The reason that a lot of fraudsters can basically get through these KBA quizzes so quickly is they already have the answers. Most of the banks I work with say if somebody answers those quizzes too quickly and too accurately, it's a sign of fraud. Because people usually get one wrong out of the 5, and they usually take some time to think through them, because a lot of them aren't necessarily intuitive questions. I have no idea what my wife's car payment is, but I can go look it up and figure it out. And of course, social security numbers aren't secrets, and we need to stop telling people that they are otherwise. The whole idea that you're going to have some number that you're going to be given, and you can lock it up, but then at the same time be asked to give it out 10, 15 times a year because of life, and then that's going to stay secret, well, that's kind of a fallacy. These days, they're not particularly hard to find. Again, I pointed out after the Equifax breach, kind of shrugged. I'm like, look, I think it's been compromised 7 or 8 times already. I don't know that I'm at any more risk because of this. It's not an Equifax defense session. I just don't know that the threat to me or any of us was higher after that breach than beforehand. When a 15-year-old can go on the dark web and get things for SSNs for 89 cents, kind of not a secret anymore. So let's stop pretending that it is. So the summary that we painted, a lot of the opening work that we did in the policy blueprint that we published last summer was to talk about this. In an era where transactions are increasingly digital, our authoritative ID systems are stuck in the paper world. The solutions like KBA that papered over this helped for a while, but attackers have caught up. There's no such thing as a shared secret that's secure in this day and age. So whether it's a password, whether it's an SSN, you can't really rely on it anymore. It's not all bad news. There's a lot of great industry innovation going on that's trying to develop better solutions to solve identity. And we're close to things like passwordless authentication. There's some really interesting identity proofing tools that rather than answer a quiz, you can say, take a picture of your license or passport and take a video selfie, and they'll try and do a match to figure out if it's a real document and if your face matches what's on the document itself. It's got some issues, but it's neat. It works more than KBA does. But at the end of the day, government is the one authoritative issuer of identity. Nobody else issues it, just government. And so our point was, everything we've been doing on the private sector side is still trying to get to the fact that it's the government who determines who we are at the end of the day. They issue and confer identity. And if we're going to really make identity better, the government's going to have to play some sort of a role. In excellent PowerPoint animation, cutting to the point, one message that we've been delivering from companies to government is, we can't solve this alone. And this is big banks and big health insurers and big security vendors and others all saying this in concert. If you want to actually really solve identity, particularly the identity proofing side, we're going to have to be able to actually somehow have the government play a role, probably by getting a way to validate data that the government has, making sure it matches what people are providing. So the challenge, of course, is, since that's a little spooky, how do you do it in a way that's actually good for security and privacy? If you take a step back, it can be. So we talk about what does better look like. Well, we talk about better security with less fraud and identity theft. So back in 2016, there was a bipartisan commission that came out on enhancing national cybersecurity, making recommendations for the next administration. They talked a lot about the problems with identity and said, given that it's basically an anomaly when a breach happens and identity doesn't provide the attack vector, and we set a goal, a national goal, that identity will be eliminated as an attack vector by 2021. Now, I don't think we're going to get there, but this is what was talked about. But it also means better convenience for consumers. How can we all open new accounts online with these without having to go through duplicative, burdensome enrollment processes where you, frankly, having to prove you are every time is a pain. It means better confidence for both consumers and service providers that the identities that are asserted online are reliable and trustworthy. And we think better privacy is an important part of it. I think as part of this we talked about with our companies, we have this model today where the way we basically prove identity is that a bunch of companies who we don't know, like the bureaus, collect information on us, and then they build products that they sell back to try and figure out who you are. So how do we turn that away from firms just aggregating data without our consent to a model where consumers can actually proactively request that their identity be validated by parties with whom they already have a trusted relationship? So we published our policy blueprint in July of 2018. It's about a 40-page document that focused on 5 areas where we think government can and should help. Got a specific action plan, really focusing on the policy layer, saying who should do what in Congress and the executive branch. At the heart of it, it's important to take away, we don't think there's any single action or initiative that's going to be able to solve identity. There's not a silver bullet here. We also, frankly, stayed away from some hot button issues because there's a lot of things around identity when it comes to voter ID, immigration. I've certainly got some strong views on, but the take was, let's focus on things that aren't controversial, that are common sense, that would be bipartisan, that we actually have a chance of making progress on in the next 2 or 3 years. And our point was that we shouldn't ignore those issues, but what's in the blueprint is focused on stuff that we can get done now, we can get done quickly and affordably. And if the policy blueprint is taken as a package and enacted and funded, we can solve a lot of the problems that we have today. So there's 5 key initiatives that are in there, and I'm going to talk about the first 3 the most today. The first is how do we prioritize the development of next-generation remote ID proofing and verification systems, getting away from these knowledge-based systems that the attackers have caught up with, but we don't seem to know how to get past. The second is try to rethink the way that we use the Social Security number. The third is promoting and prioritizing the use of strong authentication. The fourth, because a lot of what we're doing in the U.S., is similar to what's happening abroad, how do we look to pursue international coordination and harmonization where feasible? And fifth, how do we educate consumers and businesses about better identity? So on the first one, how do we get better remote ID proofing systems? So the story I tell here that kind of drove this is, so you guys all know what the Real ID Act is, right? I don't know, hopefully most of you have your driver's licenses because the lines are getting longer. I had to get mine in November of 2016. And even though I've lived in DC since 1996, the DMV said, you got to come down and prove who you are. And it was, a real, it's a pain in the ass. But, I took a couple hours off work, went to the DMV, brought my old license, my passport, dug up my birth certificate and social security card, which I still had, a lot of people don't, a couple pay stubs, a couple utility bills, waiting in line, appearing in front of a government official, and what did I get at the end? A new plastic card that, aside from having a star in the corner, it's functionally, the same to the old plastic card that I had. So about 6 months later, I guess this is spring of 2017, my wife and I wanted to take out a home equity line in our house to finish our basement. We got 2 little kids, they're noisy, and they're on the first floor being noisy a lot, and we had an unfinished basement, and we said, what if we made that nice for them, and then we could put them down there and not hear them. We even spent a couple $1,000s extra to put sound insulation in the ceiling, which is a really good investment. Oh, it'll be terrifying when they're teenagers, because then you'll want to know what's happening down there. But anyways, went online to the bank, wanted to figure out the product I wanted. Spent about 10-15 minutes filling the form out. There's a whole bunch of information that they asked for. And I'm getting excited. I'm 2017, it's all digital, yeah, this is going to be great. And at the end, a little screen pops that says, all right, Mr. Grant, we've got all the information we need. Now, so we can get on with processing this loan package, can you please come down to the nearest bank branch so we can look at the plastic card in your wallet and look at you and figure out, if you're really you, and we can move this thing forward. And I'm sitting here thinking, no, this is stupid. I was just at the DMV 6 months ago. They put me through the ringer, trying to prove I'm really Jeremy Grant. Why can't I go on and log into the DMV, say with my YubiKey, or because most mortal people won't actually have one, why couldn't I have like a mobile driver's license app bound to my smartphone at the time of issuance, and say to them, hey guys, remember me? Of course you do. You know who I am more than anybody else, because I don't think anybody goes through as rigorous a process, most Americans at least, when it comes to in-person proofing, as they're going to do for the driver's license. I'm trying to do this thing at this bank. Could you vouch for me? I'd like to ask you to vouch for me. Could you tell them a few things about me or validate some things about me? And the answer from a technology perspective is that wouldn't be hard to set up at all. But DMVs don't do this. And federal agencies that have identity information or issue credentials to us, like the Social Security number or the passport, don't do this. And so the idea is, if I've already gone through this process once, can I ask the agency that vetted me to vouch for me when I need to prove who I am to another party? And so the root of our first item is arguing that our legacy paper-based systems need to be modernized around a privacy-protecting, consumer-centric model that would allow a consumer to ask an agency that already issued them a credential to stand behind it in the online world